Hey there, Wargamers, Justin here, Paint here, and today I'm going to talk about threat projection. I'd like to welcome you guys back to the channel. If you are new here, please hit that like and subscribe. We'd like to have you a part of the crew, a part of the garrison, a part of the armed painters. Viewers? I guess that kind of sounds weird. Basically, I'd like to have you come hang out and sound off and let me know what you think of stuff. Give me your thoughts. A lot of times when you guys leave comments, I'm like, hey, that's a cool thing to talk about. Yeah, I don't know what to talk about sometimes until you guys tell me what you want me to talk about. So if you're new here, love to hear from you. But today I want to talk about threat projection. And yes, we've got my handy dandy piece of paper out today. We are doing renovations at the shop, so I can't do any filming at the game table right now. Else I might have some overhead view, and perhaps we'll reassess this video and do something with more 3D elements to talk about it. But in general, I think the paper will help with this a little bit. So what do I mean by threat projection? I mean getting a unit into the game and into the fight. I talked about this briefly when we were talking about my Timberwolf, the W variant, and why I like that. If you ever watched that video, be sure to check it out. If you have access to some clan mechs or play mercs or maybe Republic of the Sphere in the Ill Clan / Dark Age era, it's a really good variant. So that being said, let's go ahead and just draw us a real not good square here. So threat projection, and this philosophy also applies for wargaming across the board. In this case, we are talking about Battletech. So generally your Battletech can be played on a 42 to 48 inch by 42 by 48, depending on where you are. I play on a 4x4 generally because it's the easiest mat that we have access to, and we don't have to measure stuff off. Because this is a little bit larger than some of the setups that other places use or other scenarios use, I usually have a large deployment. So halfway point for this board would be 24 inches. And then the tick marks, this would be 36 or 12 depending on your perspective, and 12 here, and then 0 here. Okay, and just for the sake of the game, we're going to say there, that is your midpoint. Now, it is worth noting your range brackets. So short range, 0 to 6, medium, 7 to 24, or actually might be like 6.01, you know what I mean? And then long range is 24 to 42, and then extreme is 42 plus, right? Your mods at those ranges are 0, 2, 4, and I believe it is 6. It doesn't really come up very much. Knowing this is going to make this make a little bit more sense. So let's take two examples, and we're going to rehash some from that Timberwolf video. So if you watch that, this is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but nothing, or something useful to talk about nonetheless. So because you are on a 4x4 mat, if you are going to deploy, you need to consider a few things. It's very easy to be 40k minded and say, I want to turtle in this corner and I want to force my way out, right? But if your opponent deploys over here, you have so much farther to go, right? This point to this point. If you were to deploy here, right, or excuse me, in the middle here, now your bubble, instead of being here, your threat projection of your ranges starts here, right? If that tracks. So if you imagine that we're moving this down the table, let me see if I've got something. All right, so let's assume this is like our bubble, our threat projection, right? It's starting here and it's moving down the table, right? Half that circle is always off the map. Half your range is always ignored. Half of it. Now, there are times that you would do that. You would run down a flank with a light unit to get behind someone. Yes, that is true. In general, when I'm talking about threat projection, it is your units that want to destroy stuff. Yes, your light mechs, your fire moths, your things of that nature, your locusts want to swarm something and do damage, but threat projection specifically for me is your units that are the heavy hitters. And yes, those light units can do it, but those light units are glass cannons. I'm talking about those units that are going to be on the table probably towards the end of the game. Those units that people fear. You got that dire wolf, the Massacari, the Timberwolf, the Battle Master, or the Warhammer, the Marauder, and those starting to get down in efficacy in terms of damage, but those are the units that are on the table for a long time. And they're also moving slow, and they don't want to be running down a flank when they move slow, and we'll get to that in a moment as well. So now if we imagine that this is your threat bubble and you're moving it down the table, the difference here versus here is the diameter. So the here to here, that's all you were getting on this side, right? You're only getting that half, right here. So you were getting your radius, right? Your radius. That same thing over here becomes a diameter, and your range is this whole bubble. So instead of only using half of your range, you're using the full band. So if you're, depending on your range efficacies, where your damage is centric at, that bubble is very big. So if medium range, for example, is 6 to 24 inches, and you're here and your threat projection is 24, that's a 24-inch circle. Versus if you're here, it's a 24-inch circle, right? And it starts to only encompass this half of the map. If you deploy here, that 24-inch bubble is basically almost the whole thing, generally, right? Because if you're dead center, and plus the width of your base, which is going to look something like that. So 24 inches this way, 24 inches this way, plus a approximately 32 millimeter base, right? Give or take. So you would be 24 inches from this edge, boom, 24 inches from that edge, boom, and that's your medium range, which makes your actual threat bubble even bigger by the size of your base, because you're measuring from your base when you're shooting. So if you take that unit and you march it to the center of the field, and you're here, as you move forward, that threat bubble goes with you. And once you're here, your threat range is basically the map, right? So threat projection, where do you need to be to leverage your damage? So if your opponent deploys here, right, and you deploy here, as you move forward, if they're coming this way and you're planning ahead and you're focusing that direction, you see them. If they deploy here, you see them, right? If you deploy here and they deploy there, you are at long range, and if you skirt like this, you never have them at optimal ranges, unless you head straight at each other, which they might not. They might just go this way and try and skirt. They might go for objectives. If you go here, you cut them off. They can't. They have to choose which way they want to go, and you can divert. You can divert, and that's important too for threat projection. So let's say your opponent deploys more centric, and you can come straight at them. No matter where they go, you can fight them because you can divert, and they can do the same, and that's fine. Now you're in a chess match of where you want to put your units and where you want them to go. If you go here, it makes your opponent's deployment very different, right? So I don't want to get too deep into this one, but making sure that your units that you want to deal damage can get there to deal damage, right? So if you were to put, let's say you're playing 5 mechs and you put 4 of them over here, and it's your 4 massive heavy hitters, right? So you've got you got your Timberwolf here, you got your Masakari here, you got your Warhammer 2C, and I don't know, insert some other big ass mecha, a Turkina, right? And then over here, you drop a Fire Moth, right? Your opponent may say, screw that, I do not want to deploy directly in front of this, because now we're both going this direction, right? Straight at each other, or this direction for objectives. I don't want to deploy here, he's just going to shoot me off the table. I'm going to offset, and I'm going to overload this flank, because this unit is easy to deal with if he comes at me, and that either makes your Fire Moth divert back, where he should have been anyway with his team at that point, or makes him go forward into a meat grinder and die. So if you were to take this and put it here, it doesn't matter where they go. You can divert this way or go. Now again, I don't want to get too deep into the deployment aspect of this, because this setup is not terrible. Your opponent may watch you doing this and may try to overload with you so that they can fight, and then you throw the Fire Moth here so that you can flank. That is also equally a thing. But in general, you want to put yourself in a position where you can move your threat bubble, project that force to bring it to bear on your opponent. And this issue is compounded tenfold, so to speak. Not quite tenfold, but it gets worse if these units are slow. So in this case, I'm thinking like a Timberwolf, and it's moving, 10 inches a turn. So this is the 12-inch mark here, so it's here, and then it's here, and 2 turns, it's put its bubble. Like you're after 2 turns, you're basically at the middle of the map, right? You're so close, right? Versus if you were to put, as I mentioned in the Mad Cat video that I was talking about, if you were to put an Annihilator here, he's moving 4 inches a turn, so 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and that bubble is moving forward, but your opponent can stay away from him, right? Versus if you're here, that bubble, it's like a tide, right? So if you think of this as, I'm looking for something to grab here. I should have grabbed a second sheet of paper. I don't have one. This will be fine. So think of this as a tide, right? So you've got a tide going across the table, right? And as you move forward, they can't really outrun it. They can get behind you and outside your firing arcs, but you can kind of like turn and rotate, and you're going like that, right? And that is a super efficient way to catch all of them. Versus if you're doing this, and you're slowly coming onto the table, right? You've still got this whole wedge that you've tried to get to, and as you're going really, really slow, they can try and skirt and do whatever. Versus if you go ahead and pick a central location here, that bubble's already established, and you're pushing that boundary forward. So if you've got a unit that moves quickly, this is not always bad because you can get to the center of the map with some speed. All right, so if you're Timberwolves here, it's not the end of the world. And there's also going to be buildings, so perhaps, you know, you want to use some cover. There's some trees here, or there's a water feature or something, you know, and a river or whatever. That looks like a tadpole. Hello, tadpole, strong arms. We'll give him a top hat. Anyways, so there might be terrain features that dictate where you go to. That is a thing, but making sure that you are aware of where you put your unit, and can my units efficiently get to a point on the board where I could project force and use their dice rolls, use their damage to leverage that to try and win the game. If you put yourself in a position where you cannot get your guns to bear quickly enough, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. Not only is that obviously a problem because you can't hit your opponent, think of it in terms of gameplay issues. So let's say you're playing chess and you position yourself in such a way that for 3 or 4 turns you can't use your queen because you block it in, right? But you really need to get it out, and you should have planned ahead. It's the same thing here. So in a game that could potentially have finite turns, maybe it's a 10-turn game, if you got to spend multiple turns getting your slow units into range before they can fire, every turn you're not firing, they are not making their points back. If deploying them more centrally would allow them to start shooting even a turn sooner, that's one more turn they've had to fire. It's one more turn they're trying to make you your points. You paid points for them. Every turn they're not firing, their points are not being utilized. So think about that. Can I project force? How can I get my units where they need to be? And slower units being more central is very, very important. This is also why in that video with that Timberwolf I really liked it, whereas the standard Timberwolf has a 10-inch move. It's going to take 3 turns to get to the center or beyond, and if my opponent's really wanting to sit back with artillery or max range, I want to get in their face. I want to cut that. I want to be shooting at medium. I want to have my maximum damage. I want to have those odds, right? I can get to the center of the table in 2 turns and be firing with that Mad Cat W because it's a 12-inch move. With the 10-inch one, not as much. You can also sprint and get there a little sooner if you know you're not going to be making shots. So there's a variety of things that you can do, but being aware of, again, how fast is my unit, how quickly can I get it into range of my opponents and maximize damage. Slow units on the outskirts are going to struggle. So think about that. If you're running an Atlas or an Annihilator, for example, a more central location is very good. Another thing to consider when you're considering threat projection, where you deploy, can I get my units in range in an optimum spot to fire at my opponent for the maximum number of turns? Sorry, lost my train of thought there. One of the things to remember is that Alpha Strike, Battletech Alpha Strike, and Classic are not Warhammer 40k. This philosophy does work with 40k. The differences in 40k, if you fail to win the dice roll to go first, your opponent can shoot you off the table, right? In Battletech Classic and in Alpha Strike, that's not going to happen unless you're using formation rules, and then it's a unit might get blown up, and that's rare in most places. You know, it's a fluff thing if you're using it, so don't stress too much over that. So if you are worried about putting your Annihilator or your Atlas or your slow unit with a low TMM out in the open on turn 1 for deployment because you don't want to get shot, you will get to move before they can fire on you, so you can go for a vantage point, so consider that. I find a lot of people that are getting into Alpha Strike that are coming from a 40k background are concerned about putting their meat and potatoes out there in the open and allowing the little hobbitses to come steal it from them, and then they forget that, oh yeah, okay, I don't have to hide all of my units on turn 1 because I'm not going to get hit with a leaf blower. I will get to return fire, assuming I have range, assuming I have line of sight, assuming I have damage that I can deal. So some of the times where you might want to hide the light unit, or the slower units that are easy to hit on the outskirts and fall into that trap, are because you come from a 40k background and you may not be considering how this game works. So remember, you will always be able to return fire unless there's some special rule that's going on. So central deployment with that. Now, the other thing to consider with threat projection, units that aren't mechs, and here I am using a freaking Sharpie, and you can see this through this, but it still holds true. So I've got my Timberwolf, and not only do I want to get to a central location, the other philosophy for threat projection is what can you do to get those units into the fight in an efficient way. It's not always just the range. The range is major for the majority of your units, but if you're bringing something different, let's say battle armor, what is their purpose? What is their function? Is this battle armor meant to be in melee or short range beating stuff up? Is it meant to sit on an objective with stealth? Is it meant to sit in trees and lay down long range fire? Does it have like a small little like artillery cannon or something? What do they want to do? For me, typically, I use my battle armor to get on an opponent's rear arc and shoot them or melee them with anti-mech. For threat projection, that means I want to throw these typically on a very, very fast mech or a mech with jump jet. So if this Mad Cat had jump, he jumps behind this Battlemaster, dumps off the battle armor. Let's say in this case, this battle armor is really good with melee. They've got anti-mech or something. I want to be base to base or within an inch, whatever. But we'll just say base to base because it looked cool. So we dropped them off, right? And they're going to try and make an anti-mech attack for the extra critical. My Mad Cat's going to shoot him in the rear, or in this case, it's probably more like a dire or a fire moth that's ran behind and dropped him. But having a unit that has jump jets or a fast speed to deploy them, to get them into range, to project that damage. If you want to bring really boss-ass battle armor, which we talked about this in a video with the, was it the Tortuga? The Tortoise, not Tortuga. It's not. This is not Captain Jack Sparrow. The Tortoise battle armor does so much damage, but what makes it lethal is the deployment system, how you project the threat onto the table. If you were to just roll these down the table real slow, they're going to get shot up. The benefit of them is to do the drive and drop type thing, but they can't. These in particular can't jump onto a mech. They don't have that ability. So what do you do? How do you do it? How do you project that threat? In their case, that means you need some type of like hover transport or something to put them in, and in that case you would come in, your hover tank would go and then dump them out, and then they melee or they shoot. So to project their threat, to get them into the fight, it's not just about being central. They want to be at short range to leverage their damage. That means they need to have a unit to accompany them. So for threat projection, things to consider: what does my unit want to do? Where do they need to be? Can I get them where they need to be? If I can't, did I deploy wrong, or should I deploy differently? If my unit is not a mech and does not want to stand there and it wants to get up in their face, how can I get it there? Can it get there on its own? If no, is there a transport that can get it there? If that's the case, this. And there's some battle armor that can jump and move and do stuff like that, but sometimes hitching a ride, whether it's inside of a transport or on top of a mech, is going to be a very efficient way to project that threat across the board onto your opponent. That may seem obvious, but for some of you may not have considered that. Like, you might just look at the raw stats and think, oh, that's good, and you don't consider what I need to do to make this function. So I think that the philosophy of understanding threat projection, what you should do, and considering that the start of your force construction is very important for making sure that you have a balanced force and something efficient to use. In closing, if there's one thing that you take from my ramble here on threat projection, please let it be that on a 4x4 map, medium range is going to be king. Short range is good, but you're going to be making more medium range shots more frequently in games with more units than you do anything else. If you want to leverage long range, you're going to have to really fight to stay there, because long range being 24 to 42, right? So you're here, you deploy a little bit, 42 inches. As soon as your opponent starts to move forward, they start to shrink your long range advantage, and you can only back up so far. Once they hit the middle of the table, you don't have it anymore. You can't. And again, if you're really trying to leverage that long range damage and try not to get shot, most units are going to be at the middle of the table by turn 3, right? And that means that they're able to cut that advantage away from you. If you're really worried about staying outside of line of sight, or about keeping that long range damage and not being hit, indirect fire might be more for you versus worrying about the long range shots. But because you're playing on a 4x4 with deployment and with a movement, after the first turn of moving, you're probably going to have most things at medium range unless your opponent sits back and does not move forward. And if you're playing with objectives, which you should be playing objective based games, because killy games are really swingy, and it could be dictated very early, but objective games are different. If you do play an objective game and you push forward and your opponent does not because they want to sit at long range, they're giving you the advantage. You are taking the momentum. You have the best odds of getting points, and if you get ahead, now they have to fight to get points to beat you, and then you can sit back in a vantage point and shoot them when they come to the objective. So think about that. And if I did not drive this point home, it is that 24 inches, 6 to 24 is your medium range. Center of the map, 24 this way, 24 this way, plus the width of your base. You basically have the whole map at medium range, so you don't have to worry about long range. If your medium range damage is good, great. Short range can happen if your opponent gets in your face, but you can slowly back up because short range is 0 to 6. You only have to worry about the lights. So medium range is going to be huge. You're going to be shooting at medium range most of the time, in my opinion, followed by short range. Long range shots are going to happen in the first couple turns of the game, maybe, and then maybe last ditch efforts at the end, or effort shots at the end, maybe. Medium range, and then short range when people get up in there or fast units do it. On that note, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this. If you got something useful out of this or want to share your thoughts, anything at all, sound off in the comments below. If you're new here, please hit that like and subscribe. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for supporting what I do. And if you want to add some further support, check out deathresigns.com, Monument Hobbies. We've got links in the description below. And if you're looking for anything Battletech related, check out Fortress Miniatures and Games, sponsor of the channel. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today, but it is time to sign off because you know if I don't, I will continue to ramble. As always, keep painting your models, keep rolling those awesome dice, and I will catch you guys next time.